Hello everyone, this is Brad Wood, and today I wanted to talk to you about server rules. Server rules are a somewhat new feature of CommadnBox servers that really have just a whole bunch of applications. It's kind of hard to just cover server rules in a screencast without it being an hour, because there's so much different stuff you can do with them. But at its shortest, server rules are a feature of JBoss Undertow. It's actually called the predicate language in Undertow. I just call them server rules in CommadnBox. And it's a little DSL, kind of a mini language that lets you easily specify rules for security, rules for URL rewriting, and even just any kind of modification of the HTTP request on the fly. So they're essentially the same basic thing as like mod rewrite, or other similar tools in Nginx or IIS that can modify the incoming to the outgoing HTTP request on the fly. So right off the bat, a quick example of what a server rule can look like is it's just a text string that looks kind of like code. It's not necessarily code, but it sort of has the appearance of methods. So here we have a very simple rule, and it comes in two pieces. We have this little arrow. The predicate language was made by Java developers, so they use this little single dash arrow, which is reminiscent of lambdas in Java. And on the left side, we have what's called the predicate. And a predicate is just a question, a yes-no question, something that's true or false. And on the right side, we have what's called the handler. So the predicate says, if I am true, execute the handler. And the handler says, this is the thing that I want to do for the request. So in our case, we're using the path suffix predicate that says if the request path ends with box.json, then if that is true, we want to set an error code of 404, which would return a response code of 404. And if you have any custom error pages declared in your server.json, the one for 404 would be used. So obviously this is a very high level and simple concept, but it can be used in a lot of different ways. You can combine together multiple predicates. You can combine together multiple handlers. You can come up with a really nice expressive way of doing it that kind of feels almost like you're writing code. There's a lot of different ways you can specify rules, and in some of my previous videos I talked about the profile feature of servers, as well as some of the flags you can turn off to block the Cold Fusion administrator. All of those rules are implemented behind the scenes using these server rules, using this Undertow predicate language. And so most of the lockdown things you do in CommadnBox are just behind the scenes automatic, server rules being added in for you. But of course, you can create your own server rules to do whatever you want. So you can create ad hoc rules in the server.json. There's an array there. You can have one or more external rule files specified in your server.json. These can be JSON files, or they can just be plain text files, right? You can create ad hoc rules in your server defaults, which would apply to all of your servers being used in that CommadnBox instance. And then again, you can have server defaults that specify external rule files. There's the built-in rules like block cfadmin, block sensitive paths. Actually has the wrong name. I renamed it at one point. And then, of course, any module, any CommadnBox module can contribute their own rules on the fly as the server's starting based on whatever the heck it is they want to do. So in its simplest form, usually inside your server.json, inside the web object, there's a rules array, and each rule is just a string here inside the array. Or if you use the rules file key, you can have a comma-delimited list of file globbing patterns. So in this example here, we would say go up one directory, look in the rules folder, and include all the files.json, right? So you can get very expressive in how you want to do it. The one benefit to having your server rules in an external file that's not JSON, that's like just a text file, is you don't have to worry about any kind of escapes. If you have backslashes or anything in the rules, that's one nice thing. But for one-off rules, I usually just kind of stick them in here. Okay. Skip over, there's a bunch more kind of stuff you can do here. So let's talk about the rule language. We talked about the baked-in rules the other day. There's three concepts. We already talked about two of them. The first one are handlers, and the handlers are the things that are doing something to the request. They're setting a header. They're returning a response code. They're rewriting the URI from one URI to another URI. The predicate are the conditionals, right? The yes, no statements that say, if I am true, if the request looks like this, if the IP address is in this range, right? And they control whether or not the handlers run. And then we also have a concept called exchange attributes. In Undertow, the combination of the incoming request and the outgoing response, those are called an exchange. And so the attributes of the exchange generically refer to any piece of data contained within the request or the response. So headers, cookies, query string variables, form variables, the remote IP address, the host name, the URI, all of these are just generically referred to as exchange attributes. Okay, so common handlers, as far as the things you might want to do to affect the request, we can set an exchange attribute. So that could mean setting a cookie, setting a header, right? We can rewrite the request to have a different URL. We can redirect it to another URL using a 301 or a 302 redirect. We can set HTTP response headers. We can send a status code like 404, 403, 500, whatever. IP access control allows us to make something conditional on the IP address ranges. So block all IP addresses unless they're localhost sort of thing. And the other really cool one is reverse proxy. This allows us to create a reverse proxy that proxies the request onto one or more backend servers. This is only a fraction of all the handlers, but these are probably the most common ones. The syntax you saw above looks a lot like a function call. We have the name of the handler, they are case sensitive, and then you have an open and a close parentheses. It has some basic rules on quoting. You can pass things positionally or as name parameters. So set error, you could pass just 404, or you could put response code equals 404. And the quotes are generally optional unless you have spaces or special characters. So it behaves a lot like CommadnBox does in that regard. Common predicates. Path would match the entire incoming path to the request, right? So everything after the domain name. Path suffix would match the end of the request, like an extension or a file name. Path prefix would be the beginning of the URI, right? Like a folder, like admin, everything inside of the admin folder. It is very important to note that these are case sensitive. So if you want to have a case insensitive check, right now you need to use the regex predicate, though there are some upcoming features to try to help make these case insensitive. Method matches the HTTP method, like get, post, put. Regular expression does exactly what you think it does. It allows you to apply a regular expression against any exchange attribute. So it doesn't just have to be the request URI. You could apply a regex against the user agent, against the IP address, against the host name. Equals just does a straight up text comparison. Is this exchange attribute equal to this, right? And so these are some of the most common predicates that you might want to tack in front of a handler to make them optional, whether or not they execute. And then finally, our exchange attributes. There's quite a few of these, but the most common ones are all here. So these mostly follow the pattern of having a %sign, having an opening and closing curly bracket, and then some sort of name. A lot of these have sort of a long name and a short name, and these are covered at length there in the Undertow docs. But remote IP address, the protocol, like HTTP, the request method, remote user, you can get any cookie value, query param value, incoming header as specified by the I, outgoing response header is specified by the O. And then if you're using things like the regex predicate, you can also reference with this little $ curly syntax any of the capture groups from the regular expression. So pretty typical. As long as you can kind of look through the docs, you can find what all these different so-called exchange attributes are that you want to use. So just to kind of go through the examples, it would take forever just to actually like show an example of every single one of these. So I'll probably just show you, kind of scroll down our rule examples page, then maybe show you a couple of them. This page is really just because I think stuff makes sense when you can actually see it working. So these are just a really common list of rules. So here we have the path predicate that says if the full path in the browser URL is /healthcheck, then rewrite the request to be healthcheck.cfm. Pretty straightforward, right? You also have the ability to stop processing rules, right? So the done handler just stops processing any rules underneath it, right? They don't run. Here we say if the HTTP method is get, then we want to set O is the name for an outgoing header, so an outgoing HTTP header. The name of the header is type, and the value, for whatever reason, is get, I guess, because that's the name of our attribute. So this would just set an HTTP header based on the method. Here we have an example of running two handlers back to back. So run the regex. If the by default, the regex will look at the request URI if you don't specify a different exchange attribute for it to look at. So any path ending with .css, and then we capture the name of the file in the capture group. We want to rewrite the request to whatever the file name was, .xcss. We have a little semicolon. We're inside of curly braces. Looks a lot like a function body kind of here. And then we also want to set an outgoing header called rewritten with a value of true. So here's two separate handlers that all run if this predicate passes. Another one, if the regex matches anything .jpeg, then we'll redirect the request to the same file name .png. Here we are setting an HTTP header out to the browser. So if we're hitting fresh content.html, then we want to set a cache control header as an O, so it's an outgoing header the browser sees with a value of no cache. All right, path prefix, if it starts with admin, so this would be, any URL that's inside of the admin folder. And we can concatenate multiple predicates together, right? So it reads a lot like Cold Fusion kind of. So if the path starts with admin and not equals remote IP address 127.0.0.1, then set error 404. So if we're hitting anything inside the admin folder, we have a remote IP address of anything but localhost, then return 404, which just aborts the request right there. It's important to note that these rules run before Cold Fusion is even invoked, right? So if you're using these rules to secure the request, they're not even reaching Cold Fusion. This is another way to do that. That's a bit more powerful. So here we have path prefix. If we're inside the admin folder, then we're going to use the IP access control handler, and this has a default behavior. So default allows false, so we're denying by default. And then if the IP address is 127.0.0 anything, we allow. So this would be similar to the previous rule, but it would allow for any localhost IP address, right? And then the failure status code is 404. Got a little cutoff there. Another way to do it. Okay, straight up blocking files is pretty easy. If the path is box.json, then return a 404. The predicate language is pretty not pedantic for the most part. So these two rules do the same thing. Whether or not you have a / doesn't matter, right? This will still match the entire path. I like the fact that they're kind of loose like that. I hate always trying to guess if I need to have a / or not. Okay. A few more examples in here, kind of showing the same basic thing. Here's one that uses the regex predicate, but instead of applying the regular expression against the request URI, we have the value is going to be an exchange attribute, which is the incoming HTTP header called user agent. And we also have case sensitive equals false. So if the word Googlebot appears in the incoming user agent header without case sensitivity taken into account, then return a 404. So endless combinations of things we can combine together. Here's a simple one that does like a basic MVC write. If the request URI is to any sort of static file, if the request URI is not to any sort of static file without any case sensitivity, then rewrite the request to index.cfm/ and whatever the original URI was. You can also detect the host name header, right? So our local server name exchange attribute. So if we're on site1.com, site2.com, or site3.com, you can rewrite the request to pull the file out of a subfolder. Okay, so, oh gosh, one more. I love the reverse proxy one. Here's this one. So this example here, if the path starts with reports, Then we create a simple reverse proxy where we round robin the traffic between these two domains. This is slightly more limited than like the Apache reverse proxy in that we're not allowed to modify the request URI. Whatever the original request URI is, will just be slapped on the end of these domains. But this is pretty sweet because it's all built in. So this is only a fraction of all the different stuff you can do, but you can use these server rules to kind of build up whatever you want. You can have as many server rules as you want, and they all execute in order every single request, and they can kick in and affect the request how you want it to do. So just to let's cook up a quick simple example. I am going to set my profile to none, and that is just to turn off all the inbuilt server rules. Because I want to show you how to debug your custom server rules, and there's probably, I don't know, sometimes 15, 20, inbuilt server rules that can exist, which is fine, but it creates a lot of debug outputs. So we're gonna just turn those off for this test. So let's create a very simple server rule. So server set web.rules. Just use our array notation. So let's see here. If the path is foo.text, then I want to rewrite it to bar.text. This should be fun. I haven't tested this ahead of time. We'll see if this works, if I can type. Okay, so my server rule is just a string inside of my array of rules. If the entire path is to foo.text, rewrite it to bar.text. And this is case sensitive again. Use regex if you need case sensitivity. So I'm going to echo out foo into foo.text, and then echo out bar into bar.text. Okay, so let's start up our server, and if the server rules aren't working, there's a whole bunch of debug information. Start a console start or just table logs, and you can either do a debug or, to get the most information, do a trace start, right? So you get a lot of output when you do a trace start, but every single aspect of the rule, all the predicates, whether or not they matched, what values they were looking at, what the next handler was that was executed, is logged for every single request, but only if you do a trace start. So let's give this server just a quick second to spin up, and I'll show you how to read. We'll see if my rule even works, and then we'll show you how to read what goes in the logs. All right, directory listing is enabled, and so it's not going to let me view that. That's because I turned off my profile to set that to none. So if I recall, if I go to foo.text, we are seeing bar in the browser, which means that we're actually viewing the contents of the bar.txt file. So our request was rewritten. So I'm going to come back over here. What I like to do is hit enter a couple times, and that just creates some visual separation. Otherwise, it all starts to jumble together. So I'm going to come back over. I'm going to hit F5 once and come back. And so all of these lines were added to the logs. And I know it kind of can start to just like blur over in your eyes. But if you just read through it, these all tell you exactly what they're doing. So we requested localhost on my local port, foo.text, right? That is correct. Okay, so look for these server rules lines. Paths foo.text matches the input of foo.text for our exchange. So this predicate, path foo.text, resolved to true. That means my predicate was matched. So now the handler is going to run. Next handler is rewrite bar.text. Okay, so it matched. Next handler is going to be the rewrite. Next line says request rewritten to /bar.text. So we know that our rewrite fired. If the predicate didn't match, it would say resolved to false. And then it would just go to the next rule in the chain if there was one. Okay, we can ignore this request security stuff. We're not using any of that. And I guess that's basically it. Now the request is done, starting to write response 4, and you see the exchange changes because the URL that we've been hitting is part of these log messages. And once the rewrite is done, you see all the future messages all now show /bar .text as the URL we're hitting. So it's really not hard to debug these. You just have to do that trace console start. And then, like I said, I recommend creating some visual separation, hitting one thing in the browser, and then coming back and just kind of parsing through, looking for all the log lines that say server rules. And it'll show you as it executes each rule, it'll show you each predicate, it'll show you whether predicates pass. If you match a regular expression, it'll show you all the capture groups that it generated. So the information's all there. You just have to know where to look. And so it's worth noting this is also a different bit of debugging than the rewrite log that you can enable, which is specifically part of the Tucky rewrites. And these Undertow server rules are not the same as the Tucky rewrites. These are all baked into Undertow. Okay, I think that's enough. Hopefully this gives you guys just kind of a basic overview and understanding of what these server rules are, what they're doing, and how you want to use them. You probably have some ideas right now of ways that you could wrap up basic rewrites or security or things of that nature. If you have questions about the syntax, you can ask on the groups. The Undertow documentation is also linked here. I don't think it's quite as nice to read just because it's one giant page, but this does list, like, you know, every single handler and what it does. And like specifically, I'll come here and I'll search for exchange attributes, and I'll find this part of the docs that cover the exchange attributes because it has the full list of everything. And you can see these exchange attributes have both a long version, right? Like %, local underscore IP, and they have a short version, %A. I don't really care for the short version because I think you're not doing yourself or your coworkers any favor when they come look at your server rules a few months later and they're like, what in the actual heck is %A supposed to mean, right? I would rather burn a few more characters and have something anybody can come read and they know what it means. But either way, there's a long and a short version of most of these exchange attributes. And you can see there's a lot more than what I included in my docs. Okay, that is it. Happy predicate ruling, and I'll see you guys next time.